Hi everyone, today we're going to be looking at Descartes' first meditation from his book Meditations on First Philosophy. This is a pretty famous piece, and there's a pretty good chance that should you decide to study philosophy at university level, you're probably going to be reading the Meditations at some point. It's one of those core philosophy texts, a bit like Plato's Republic, that you're definitely going to end up coming into contact with. So it's good to be able to get a bit of an insight into it now. This first meditation, Descartes going to be basically leading us along into what we call skepticism, or some people like to dramatically call it the pit of skepticism. So just to quickly give a bit of a overview, skepticism is the sort of the basis in philosophy where you hold everything to a very, very, very high burden of proof. In other words, if something isn't absolutely certain, then you're going to treat it as if it is false. Now, this is much more extreme than just being basically skeptical. People often say that they're skeptical of this or skeptical of that. Look, the words are very similar, but in philosophy, when we say that someone is a skeptic, generally this is a much stronger thing. And so Descartes is going to show you just how deep this skepticism can go in this first meditation. He'll start off with the absolute knowledge that comes from being one of the world's greatest mathematicians and scientists alive at that time, and within 4 pages will have destroyed his entire life's work through skepticism. So what are we going to see in this first meditation? Well, to begin with, we're going to see Descartes setting up the parameters for the rest of his work. And what we mean by that is, essentially, he's going to be laying out the rules that he's going to follow to try and find truth, which is really the goal of the meditations. Now, his parameters for this, or his rules, are that he's not going to accept anything which has the potential for doubt. In other words, he wants to only progress along the pathway that is absolutely certain. And so in this way, he feels like any conclusion he comes to will itself be absolutely certain. In the first meditation, he'll look at 2 areas for where we get knowledge. The first one is from the senses. This is sometimes referred to as a posteriori knowledge, which is Latin. So a posteriori knowledge is knowledge that we gain through experience or through the senses. So a good example of this is science. Science is a posteriori knowledge. If I want to know about the atomic makeup of whatever, or the molecular makeup of whatever, I have to study it. I have to look at it. I have to analyze it. I can't just figure that out by thinking. The other type of knowledge is a priori knowledge. And this is knowledge gained through reasoning alone. So a priori knowledge is something that you can just think about and sort of meditate over, and you will eventually come up with the answer. Again, a good example of this is mathematics, and this is why mathematics is seen to be sort of pure knowledge or pure logic. And so Descartes is going to be talking about both of these types. He doesn't use the terms a posteriori and a priori, but it's good to know them. With the first one, knowledge gained through the senses, he's going to say, but the only issue with this is that our senses can fool us. For example, when we see a mirage on the road, we believe that there's something there that isn't. How do we know, whenever we're studying anything, whether we're seeing the truth or not? Could this be like a mirage? But also, more pertinently, well, how do we know that the sense information we're getting is even correct? We've all had the experience of very realistic dreams. If anyone's ever had a nightmare, you know how real a dream can feel, how real the things you see can seem, how real the things you hear can seem. It's not until we wake that we realize it was a dream, and so how do we know when we're studying something whether we're dreaming or not? Is this actually the truth? From this, Descartes puts a line through all a posteriori knowledge. The second type, a priori, or knowledge gained through reasoning alone. This feels more certain because it doesn't rely on the senses. It just relies on our ability to put things together in our head. But Descartes says, well, if we imagine that instead of an all-loving God, there is an all-powerful evil deceiver. This being would have the power to trick us every time we thought of something. So, for example, every time I thought of the equation 2 plus 3, the evil deceiver would make me think that the answer is 5 when actually it's something else. If the evil deceiver was all-powerful, they could do that. And so, because of this, it means that my reasoning is doubtful. And so Descartes puts a line through it and then doesn't want to trust it. Okay, so just keep in mind, Descartes is not trying to disprove his senses or his reasoning. He's just trying to kind of poke a hole in them and show that there is the potential that they could be doubted, because he's considering anything that could be doubted as wholly incorrect. So just be clear about that. He's not disproving them. He's just saying that they could be wrong, and so we shouldn't trust them. Alright, let's get cracking with the reading. It's a pretty short one, the first meditation, so hopefully we'll get through it quickly. Pens and highlighters at the ready, and here we go. So the first meditation, what can be called into doubt. Some years ago I was struck by the large number of falsehoods that I had accepted as true in my childhood, and by the highly doubtful nature of the whole edifice that I had subsequently based on them. I realized that it was necessary, once in the course of my life, to demolish everything completely and start again right from the foundations, if I wanted to establish anything at all in the sciences that was stable and likely to last. So, Descartes here is basically saying when he was a kid he stumbled across this idea that everything that he is thinking or learning about may be false, but, you know, he didn't want to dwell on that, he wanted to move on, and so he sort of put it aside to deal with another day. Well, the other day has come, and he's dealing with it now. But the task looked an enormous one, and I began to wait until I should reach a mature enough age to ensure that no subsequent time of life would be more suitable for tackling such inquiries. This led me to put the project off for so long that I would now be to blame if by pondering over it any further I wasted the time still left for carrying out. So today I have expressly rid my mind of all worries and arranged for myself a clear stretch of free time. I am here quite alone, and at last I will devote myself sincerely and without reservation to the general demolition of my opinions. So Descartes here is, kind of laying out what he's going to do, the general demolition of his opinions. So here we go. But to accomplish this, it will not be necessary for me to show that all my opinions are false, which is something I could perhaps never manage. If you can imagine every individual opinion you hold and trying to prove whether it's right or wrong, I mean, this would take forever. Reason now leads me to think that I should hold back my assent from opinions which are not completely certain and indubitable, just as carefully as I do from those which are patently false. So, for the purpose of rejecting all my opinions, it will be enough if I find in each of them at least some reason for doubt. And to do this, I will not need to run through them all individually, which would be an endless task. Once the foundation of a building are undermined, anything built on them collapses of its own accord. So I will go straight for the basic principles on which all my former beliefs rested. So he's saying here, look, he's not going to go for each individual instance of belief or opinion. Instead, he's going to go to the root, where his beliefs and where his opinions have come from. And, as I've already said, he's going to identify that all of our beliefs and all of our opinions come from two potential places. The first is from our senses and the information that they give us. The second is from, for lack of a better term, our mind and the reasoning that our mind is able to use. These are the 2 points that he's going to attack, because he sees them as the foundation for our knowledge. If it can undermine the foundation of our senses, then anything built on that foundation, like the sciences, will crumble. If he can undermine the foundation of our mind, or our thoughts, anything built on that foundation, like mathematics, will crumble. So this is him just laying out that process. Whatever I have up until now accepted as most true, I have acquired either from the senses or through the senses. But from time to time I have found that the senses deceive, and it is prudent never to trust completely those who have deceived us even once. Nice little tip here from Descartes, I think, for life, It is prudent never to trust completely those who have deceived us even once. Remember this, people, when you're talking to others and with your friends and family. Has this person lied to you before? For Descartes, it's prudent, or it makes sense for you to never fully trust this person again. There's a sort of once a cheater, always a cheater, but the Descartes version. Yet, although the senses occasionally deceive us with respect to objects which are very small or in the distance, there are many other beliefs about which doubt is quite impossible, even though they are derived from the senses. For example, that I am here, sitting by the fire, wearing a winter dressing gown, holding this piece of paper in my hand, and so on. Again, how could it be denied that these hands or this whole body are mine, unless perhaps I were to liken myself to madmen, whose brains are so damaged by the persistent vapours of melancholia that they firmly maintain they are kings when they are paupers, or say that they are dressed in purple when they are naked, or that their heads are made of earthenware, or that they are pumpkins or made of glass. But such people are insane, and I would be thought equally mad if I took anything from them as a model for myself. So Descartes here has said, sure, our senses can fool us about things that are far off in the distance, and, okay, so they're not perfect, but surely I can trust really basic sense information, like that I am here, that I exist in the way that I do. I'm sitting on this couch, I'm doing this recording, I can feel the headphones on my head. That kind of idea. He says, well, there are people who would say these things even when they're false, but these are mad people or insane people, and we shouldn't use them as our example. Descartes is very tongue-in-cheek here. He's not actually pumping up his own tyres. He's being self-deprecating, just to be clear. So a brilliant piece of reasoning. As if I were not a man who sleeps at night and regularly has all the same experiences while asleep as madmen do when awake. Indeed, sometimes even more improbable ones. How often, asleep at night, am I convinced of just such familiar events, that I am here in my dressing gown sitting by the fire, when in fact I am lying undressed in bed. We get a little insight here into how boring Descartes' dreams are. He's saying as if he hasn't had dreams where he's sitting in front of the fire in his dressing gown, when actually he was naked and in bed. Not sure why he's sleeping naked either, but wear pajamas, everyone. But all of this aside, he is pointing out a key issue, that when we dream, we do get sensory information that is false. We see, we hear things, we feel things. All of this is false, and we realize that when we wake up. Who's to say we're not waiting to wake up right now? Okay. Yet, at the moment, my eyes are certainly wide awake when I look at this piece of paper. I shake my head and it is not asleep. As I stretch out and feel my hand, I do so deliberately, and I know what I am doing. All this would not happen with such distinctness to someone asleep. Indeed, again self-deprecating here, as if I did not remember other occasions when I have been tricked by exactly similar thoughts while asleep. As I think about this more carefully, I see plainly that there are never any sure signs by means of which being awake can be distinguished from being asleep. I mean, that section is already underlined in your book for good reason, but it's a really key quote there. So there are never any sure signs by means of which being awake can be distinguished from being asleep. So this is an inception where we can spin a top, and that can tell us whether we're awake or asleep. There is no measure for whether we're awake or asleep, and this is the issue that Descartes points out. The result is that I begin to feel dazed, and this very feeling only reinforces the notion that I may be asleep. So, confused, feeling a little bit funny, a little bit bamboozled. Well, maybe you are asleep. Maybe you are dreaming. Suppose then that I am dreaming, and that these particulars, that my eyes are open, that I am moving my head and stretching out my hands, are not true. Perhaps indeed I do not even have such hands or such a body at all. Nonetheless, it must surely be admitted that the visions which come in sleep are like paintings which must have been fashioned in the likeness of things that are real, and hence that at least these general kinds of things, eyes, head, hands, and the body as a whole, are things which are not imaginary, but are real and exist. For even when painters try to create sirens and satyrs with the most extraordinary bodies, they cannot give them natures which are new in all respects. They simply jumble up the limbs of different animals. So here what Descartes is saying is, okay, well maybe I can't be sure of sensory information at any given time, but surely like the overall must be true. So, you know, hands must exist. Get it? Get it? Yeah. And, you know, the eyes must exist, and head must exist, and body as a whole must exist. And he points to, for example, painters, when they try and create new beasts, generally all they're doing is putting together the body parts of other beasts. You know, and if you think of like a griffin, which is, well, it's like the head of a lion, the body of an eagle. Oh no. There's the head of an eagle and the body of a lion and then the tail of a snake. Anyway, whatever. It's made up. It doesn't exist. Yeah, he's saying, you know, a bit like painters, all of these things must have existed for them to put them together. So continuing on, or if perhaps they managed to think up something so new that nothing remotely similar has ever been seen before, something which is therefore completely fictitious and unreal, at least the colours used in the composition must be real. By similar reasoning, although these general kinds of things, eyes, head, hands and so on, could be imaginary, it must at least be admitted that certain other, even simpler and more universal things are real. These are, as it were, the real colours for which we form all the images of things, whether true or false, that occur in our thoughts. So what Descartes is saying here is, okay, well, even if, for example, hands are not real, or the head is not real, even if all of this is imagined, there must be some sort of basic principles that are real, you know, basic shape or basic colour, that allow us to build these images. So yeah, continuing on. This class appears to include corporeal nature in general, and its extension, the shape of extended things, the quantity or size and number of these things, the place in which they may exist, the time through which they may endure, and so on. So these are like the basic things that Descartes is saying must exist. So a reasonable conclusion from this might be that physics, astronomy, medicine, and all other disciplines which depend on the study of composite things are doubtful. By composite things, he means the study of things that are put together. They're not primary things themselves. So, for example, you know, astronomy is the study of the stars, okay, and the planets. I mean, these are composite things. They're put together from other things, particularly from our sensory information. So he's saying, okay, well, let's put a line through these things. They might be doubtful. So while arithmetic, geometry, and other subjects of this kind, which deal only with the simplest and most general things, regardless of whether they really exist in nature or not, contain something certain and indubitable. So here he's separating a posteriori from a priori knowledge, just to be clear. So arithmetic and geometry, this is knowledge that we gain through reasoning alone. Triangles don't exist, circles don't exist, we never come across squares in nature. There is no such thing as the perfect shape, but we understand the principles of the perfect shape through reasoning alone. For whether I am awake or asleep, 2 and 3 added together are 5, or a square has no more than 4 sides. It seems impossible that such transparent truths should incur any suspicion of being false. So here we sort of feel like, well, surely this is right, yeah? You know, 2 plus 3 added together equals 5. This isn't something that I've gained through the senses. Okay, this isn't information that I've garnered from the physical world around me or the corporeal world around me. This is knowledge gained through reasoning alone. And yet, firmly rooted in my mind is the long-standing opinion that there is an omnipotent God, all-powerful, by the way, omnipotent, who made me the kind of creature that I am. How do I know that he has not brought it about that there is no earth, no sky, no extended thing, no shape, no size, no place, while at the same time ensuring that all these things appear to me to exist just as they do now? So Descartes is sort of talking about the problem of the concept of an omnipotent God, which is very problematic for a whole range of different reasons, and maybe I'll do a post about that one day. But for now, what Descartes is saying is, well, if we're talking about an all-powerful God, then this God may be able to, or absolutely would be able to, make me think that all of these things existed: earth, sky, extended things, shape, size, place, make me think that it all existed, when actually it doesn't. I mean, they're all powerful, they can do anything. What is more, just as I consider that others sometimes go astray in cases where they think they have the most perfect knowledge, how do I know that God has not brought it about that I too go wrong every time I add 2 and 3, or count the sides of a square, or in some even simpler matter, if that is imaginable? So what he's saying here is, well, how do I know God isn't tricking me when I think of 2 plus 3 equaling 5? What if this all-powerful God is actually making me think it equals 5 when actually it equals 6? But perhaps God would not have allowed me to be deceived in this way, since he is said to be supremely good, so omnibenevolent here, supremely good, all-loving. But if it were inconsistent with his goodness to have created me such that I am deceived all the time, it would seem equally foreign to his goodness to allow me to be deceived, even occasionally. Yet this last assertion cannot be made. So Descartes is saying here, well, if God's all-loving, surely he wouldn't fool me. Yeah, that seems, okay, we can accept that. But if God's all-loving, why would God allow me to be fooled ever? In other words, why does God allow my senses to be fooled? I mean, if God is all-loving and all-powerful, God can literally do anything and wants me to always be happy and safe and secure, then why does God allow my senses to be fooled? This we can't question. We know our senses fool us. So, therefore, this makes us question the nature of God. Is God omnibenevolent? Is God omnipotent, all-powerful and all-loving? If God is both, then why does God allow us to be fooled? This is kind of what Descartes is saying, and it's a worrying question. Perhaps there may be some who would prefer to deny the existence of so powerful a God rather than believe that everything else is uncertain. So, atheism here. Let us not argue with them, but grant them that everything said about God is a fiction. According to their supposition, then, I have arrived at my present state by fate or chance, or a continuous chain of events, or by some other means. Yet since deception and error seem to be imperfections, the less powerful they make my original cause, the more likely it is that I am so imperfect as to be deceived all the time. I have no answer to these arguments, but am firmly compelled to admit that there is not one of my former beliefs about which a doubt may not properly be raised. And this is not a flippant or ill-considered conclusion, but is based on powerful and well-thought-out reasons. So in future I must withhold my assent from these former beliefs just as carefully as I would from obvious falsehoods, if I want to discover any certainty. So this section, he's sort of saying, well, what about people who say that God doesn't exist? Okay, even if God doesn't exist, then how can I be sure of what I'm thinking about? How do I know that what I'm thinking about is actually true? How did I get to where I am today? What basis do I have for my rational knowledge, my a priori knowledge? Not a lot. Fate, chance, all of these things could be doubtful. But it is not enough merely to have noticed this. I must make an effort to remember it. My habitual opinions keep coming back, and, despite my wishes, they capture my belief, which is, as it were, bound over to them as a result of long occupation and the law of custom. I shall never get out of the habit of confidently assenting to these opinions, so long as I suppose them to be what in fact they are, namely, highly probable opinions, opinions which, despite the fact that they are in a sense doubtful, as has just been shown, it is still much more reasonable to believe than to deny. So what Descartes is saying here is we need to be on our guard. He's just proven that you really shouldn't be trusting anything that you think about or see or hear, anything you get from your senses. But kind of laziness takes over us, where we go, yeah, okay, you might experience this as that kind of eye-opening philosophy lesson, and then the bell goes and you're off to, I don't know, like biology, and you're back into trusting your senses for information. Descartes is saying we need to be on guard for this, because falling back into this habit is going to lead us astray. In view of this, I think it will be a good plan to turn my will in completely the opposite direction and deceive myself, by pretending for a time that these former opinions are utterly false and imaginary. I shall do this until the weight of preconceived opinions is counterbalanced, and the distorting influence of habit no longer prevents my judgment from perceiving things correctly. In the meantime, I know that no danger or error will result from my plan, and that I cannot possibly go too far in my distrustful attitude. This is because the task now in hand does not involve action, but merely the acquisition of knowledge. So here Descartes is saying, alright, to break this habit of sliding back into trusting my senses or my mind for giving me information, I'm going to employ extreme skepticism. Absolutely everything I'm going to come into contact with, I am going to doubt. Right down to the most basic. And I'm going to keep doing this until I break my habit of trusting what I am perceiving. And how is he going to do this? Well, this is where we get the introduction of the malicious demon, or I prefer to use the word the evil deceiver. I will suppose, therefore, that not God, who is supremely good and the source of truth, but rather some malicious demon of the utmost power and cunning, has employed all his energies in order to deceive me. So, just to be clear here, we're talking about the same attributes of God in terms of being all-powerful. This evil demon can literally do anything, including control thoughts, but instead of being all-loving or omnibenevolent, it is all-malicious or all-hating. And so everything that it can do to cause suffering in me, it will. And lying to me constantly, all the time, every time I think, would be an example of this. I shall think that the sky, the air, the earth, colours, shapes, sounds, and all external things are merely the delusions of dreams which he has devised to ensnare my judgment. I shall consider myself as not having hands or eyes or flesh or blood or senses, but as falsely believing that I have all these things. I shall stubbornly and firmly persist in this meditation, and, even if it is not in my power to know any truth, I shall at least do what is in my power, that is, resolutely guard against assenting to any falsehoods, so that the deceiver, however powerful and cunning he may be, will be unable to impose on me in the slightest degree. So Descartes here is basically saying, okay, let's kick this off. I don't have a physical body. I don't have senses. Every time I think about anything, it is incorrect. Absolutely everything that I believe is utterly false. And in this way, at the very least, he's getting one up on the evil deceiver by not accepting any of the evil deceiver's lies. He's not finding truth. Let's be clear about that. He's not finding any knowledge, which is what he actually wants. But at least he's not allowing the evil deceiver to lie to him now. But this is an arduous undertaking, and a kind of laziness brings me back to normal life. I am like a prisoner who is enjoying an imaginary freedom while asleep. As he begins to suspect that he is asleep, he dreads being woken up and goes along with the pleasant illusion as long as he can. In the same way, I happily slide back into my old opinions and dread being shaken out of them, for fear of my peaceful sleep. Excuse me. For fear that my peaceful sleep may be followed by hard labour when I wake, and that I shall have to toil not in the light, but amid the inextricable darkness of the problems I have now raised. This is a great little analogy for what the pit of skepticism is. Inextricable darkness that you yourself raise. Descartes here is saying we need to be on guard because that laziness that we were talking about before will take over. It's hard to constantly be questioning everything that we're thinking about, and as soon as we stop actively doing it, we're going to slide back into old routines, and the evil deceiver is going to be able to trick us again. This analogy of the prisoner, it's a little bit like, being a prisoner who's dreaming. We've been living in this dream, and now Descartes has shown us what the real world is like, but we're getting a sense of it, and we're like, no, I just want to stay in the dream world, thanks. I don't want to go into that real world. So this is where the first meditation ends, with Descartes totally undermining all knowledge. So, tune into the second meditation, where within about 2 paragraphs Descartes establishes something that he says he knows again. So don't worry, we don't stay in the pit very long. But for now, let's wallow in the inextricable darkness of the problems that we have now raised. Thanks for listening. Always an upper. Thanks, Descartes. See you guys in class.